think we're ready now. Good evening. The ground rules have already been gone over. Once again, my name is George Davis, and I'll be facilitating tonight rather than interviewing as I usually do. I'd like to start this way by saying that September 7, if you check the pages of history, some important events have happened on September 7 in the past. In 1822, Pedro I, son of King João VI, declared Brazil politically independent from Portugal. In 1996, the legendary rapper Tupac Shakur was shot and mortally wounded in Las Vegas. In 2008, the US government stepped in and effected a $5 trillion rescue of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, just about when the housing bubble burst in what was the Great Recession of modern times. And come September 7, 2019, the pen and the smartphone is poised to record the result of a massive contest, the right to be leader of the People's National Party, where Peter Murcott Bunting will challenge the incumbent Dr. Peter Phillips. So that's what this is all about. As my colleagues have said, the questions that have been set tonight have not been from my pen or our collective pen as a group. Rather, we've taken them from social media. We put out the promotional material earlier this week, well, from last week, and persons have been sending questions because, unlike you, they don't have the privilege of being here sitting in the audience to ask the questions directly of Peter. So I'm acting as the go-between between them and yourself, because you're going to get a chance as well to ask the questions that they'd want to hear the man who would be PNP president answer. So the first question for you comes from a Twitter user, @Royen23. Simple. Why should you be leading the PNP at this time?
Well, first of all, good evening, everybody, and to all the online viewers. The PNP, I think, is at a crossroads, a watershed. We have not, to my mind, had that renewal, some would say the revolution that was needed coming out of the appraisal report of the reasons why we lost the 2016 election. And we have sort of been drifting for 2 or 3 years. The call for this movement, this Rise United movement, was not from me alone. Really, it has been from colleagues, it has been from the grassroots. And essentially what we've been hearing is that the people want to be heard, they want to be valued, they want to have a say in how their political party and how governance is conducted, and we are responding to that call.
Yeah.
And I am really just perhaps the catalyst for it. It's really not about me. In fact, I have, I've said it a number of times, I've been pleasantly surprised. I've actually been moved and inspired by the fact that the people have taken this Rise United movement, they've made it their own, and they're running with it. And some of us in leadership are now trying to catch up.
You say, though, that I am the catalyst, but then you say that it's not about me. But let's talk about you. Who are you? Who are you who will offer yourself to delegates come September 7th to say, make me the leader of the PNP?
Well, I've been someone literally supporting the PNP or being a member of the PNP for my entire life, from high school. I was a fan of Michael Manley. Even as a sixth form, I was up and down to political meetings whenever I got the chance. I volunteered for the party when I came back home from university. At 29, I was a caretaker candidate for the party. At 32, I was the youngest MP in my batch in 1993. And I've served as General Secretary. I've served 4 terms as an MP. I've served as a Minister of Government. So I think I've had a good apprenticeship. I've had a broad experience in the party. I've never lost an election, and I've never represented a safe seat. So I think I've demonstrated some skills in political strategy, political organization, and now more so in political communication, which has to be a core competence of a modern political party going forward.
You speak strongly about yourself. You speak strongly about yourself, as you should, and the records are there to say to anybody who wanted to check from that perspective who Bunting is. But what is it about Peter Bunting? What is it about you that has often caused even PNP diehards to say, yeah, Bunting, but we not so like him, even within the PNP itself, not even mentioning outside with your political rivals. What is it about you think that has caused people to have this impression that deep down at your core, you're not a likable man?
Well, I think if I would speculate, there are probably two reasons. The first of all is that I am fundamentally a shy person. People don't associate that with politicians. But there are some politicians, as they see a crowd, they're drawn to them like a magnet, and they wade in and they hug everybody. For me, when I see a crowd, my instinct is to shy away and look, can I pick out one or two people that I might know their faces and then sort of approach tentatively. Of course, over time, with practice, you get a little better at it. So the first thing is, because people don't associate shyness with politicians, they interpret it as being aloof or standoffish. The second thing, and we've heard it in this campaign, I think because I've had some amount of success in the private sector, people again assume that if you are, wealthy, yes, by Jamaican standards anyway, then you really don't care for the average person because, you've moved beyond that. And my answer to that is really if you look at some of the leaders of the revolutions on behalf of people, if you look at Fidel Castro in Cuba, for example, he didn't come from a peasant family. He came from a family that owned hundreds of acres of land. He was a lawyer. But it's that conscious fraction of the privileged class who choose to provide leadership on behalf of the ordinary person.
But hold on. You could have cited many revolutionary leaders from Latin America, from the Caribbean, from elsewhere in the world. You chose Castro. Or is Peter Bunting the 2019 Castro? Is that what you're saying?
No. Well, Castro is close, and I've actually had the privilege of meeting him a couple of times. Yes. So obviously, that it's someone that I relate to.
But I hear you on why you think even those within the PNP, some of them don't warm to you. But I'm probing further to ask, is it that because of your wealth, because you say you're naturally shy man, those in the party who should know you best, who've been there with you for decades, why is it that those persons who know you best don't defend you against the accusations that Bunting is not a likable man?
Well, I think the fact that the majority of my parliamentary colleagues are supporting me in this contest suggests
hold on.
Those who know me best.
All right. You know very well, 51% is the majority share in 100%, but 49% is very high. So I still put the question. The question still stands. So many people who know you so well, Peter Bunting, but you'd never hear a man raise his voice in defense of, no, Peter at heart is a nice man. Peter is for the people. It's almost as if they feed this perception that you are not likable.
I think that's the circles you're moving in, John.
No. Here's the thing. It's not the George narrative. Yeah? It's the narrative that is even being spun by your political rivals. Because the one united, the one PNP campaign, that
the one united,
the one PNP campaign, when you listen to the stump speeches, the hosting speeches, that is a lot of what I have said is what they've said, which is why I can confidently state the question as not one that's germinating from me.
Right. So obviously they have a political interest, yes, in positioning me in a certain way. Now, I am not really going to get caught up responding to that, because for me it's not about personalities. You know, it's not about my personality versus someone else's personality. It's what I am standing for and what my objective is and what our goals are. So, you know, I really don't want to go down that rabbit hole of personality. We want to move on to bigger things, more important.
Hold on, let me come this way. All right. This is the thing. This reasoning is about the things that you want to talk about and the things that people want to hear you speak based on what they want to know. So it's an each way wager. Hear me now. People have said, okay, Peter Bunting, politics is a blood sport where there are no guarantees. So there's no guarantee that a Bunting PNP will win the next election. There's no guarantee. Fine? So since there's no guarantee of that, why did you not accept the role that Dr. Phillips had offered you? And if the PNP loses the next election, it would be an opportune time for you to have challenged at that time. And perhaps at that time, you would have been invited to take on the role of PNP president. Why not?
Yeah, and that's...
Settle down.
That's a fair question. And I think it very usefully separates types of politicians.
Yes.
So if you're a politician who your goal is to be something, you want to be an MP or you want to be a cabinet minister, or you want to be a prime minister, then you will position yourself strategically to achieve that. Mm-hmm. But if your goal is to do something rather than be something, if your goal is to improve the lot of workers in this country, if your goal is to get investment in inner city communities rather than deal with just suppression of crime, then you are too impatient to wait for that to happen. We can't afford to just lose the next election and be in opposition for the next 6 years.
All right. I had the pleasure, I had the privilege of interviewing Mikhail Phillips some weeks after you spoke with me at another place. And I put it to him, he said that effectively what had happened was that Peter Bunting, after the February 2016 defeat, had effectively dropped hands, didn't play the role that the party had given him to play in the wake of that election defeat, and was basically a fifth columnist within the PNP. He agreed to that. And that you engineered the staleness of the PNP to your own advantage so that you could now launch that challenge. And he says, hold on, I'm not finished. Folks, it's a matter of record. I'm not telling tales, yes? So he said that because of that, as a personality, there's a difficulty with that aspect of your personality. And I put that issue to you for you to respond.
Oh, what a tangled web we weave. If I say I won't dignify that with a response, you might say I'm arrogant. But truthfully, I really, I can say quite definitively, that's just not true. And I'm willing to put my integrity to stand against anyone else who is making those allegations.
All right. Let me go back to social media. Again, a Twitter question. @Cas199X is asking, and I think it's fair to ask it in this early segment of the program. If elected, would there be a reshuffling of the shadow cabinet?
Put it this way. Those who are supporting me and supporting the Rise United campaign are doing so because they're not satisfied with the status quo. So if they're not satisfied with the status quo and we represent change, then we would betray them if coming into office we don't change. So there must be the approach of the PNP, the personnel in particular roles, etc., must change to keep faith with the mandate from the delegates. Now, having said that, the PNP that I would lead must have space for everyone. So there's not going to be a purging and say, okay, you were not rising, so we marginalize you. But it will be a matter of finding the most appropriate spot for each person, given their skills and competencies.
I know you're a man of detail, so you watch things and you read things. Some politicians say they don't, which I find amazing, but that's another thing. Have you been stung, maybe put out by some of the things that your colleagues campaigning on the other side for Dr. Phillips's camp have said about your intention to take the reins of the party?
I don't pay any attention to that at all. My only, I guess, having been a 4-term politician, you have very thick skin. So it really, I just dismiss that.
And I say that to ask if there's anybody who has said anything, who you definitely, if you win, him or she not coming in my shadow cabinet. That's why I asked the question.
No, I won't say that. First of all, I haven't been paying much attention to what they said.
So I was wrong about you, not a man of detail.
My campaign team has been on a treadmill. I'm out every day. I'm in Clarendon, I'm in St. Anne, I'm in St. Elizabeth, I'm in Westmoreland, I'm in St. James. I don't have time to waste on dealing with petty personal insults. That's not me.
All right. Let's move on then. What will your, coming on the back of the shadow cabinet shuffle question, what will your PNP look like and represent?
Sorry, just what will it look like?
What will your PNP, if you get in on September 7th, what will Bunting's PNP look like? What will Bunting's PNP represent?
Well, one of the things we've said is that this campaign is about achieving 2 objectives. There's an internal one, and that is to transform the party. And then secondly, through a transformed party, to transform the country. And through government, obviously. So one of the things that we are going to look at in the party is that any organization, political party or not, that's 80 plus years old, has to evolve, has to adapt, has to be fit for purpose for the contemporary era that it's in. And that will be task 1. And in doing that, not just modernizing, energizing, finding new ways to engage our party members and the public through social media, using technology, other modern communications approaches. Having done that, having had a party now that is vibrant, is energetic, we want to now turn our attention to the bigger picture. We're operating in a Jamaica today where the average worker is very uncertain, very insecure. Many of them don't have the basic rights that Michael Manley fought for in the 70s. They have no entitlement to vacation leave with pay, sick leave, maternity leave with pay. Through this device of the contract work, tens of thousands in the security guard industry, in the tourism industry, in the retail industry don't have those rights. We have to focus on returning those rights, which we were world leaders in the 70s and which we're now lagging behind.
All right, since you went there, let's go economy then. The economic philosophy that Jamaica will look to fulfill under Bunting's PNP, what's that?
Well, it's one of economic inclusion. We have done a lot of work over the last 6 years to ensure that the macroeconomy is put on a sustainable path. We started that during our administration, and to the credit of this government, they've continued it. Now, that is a necessary, but not a sufficient condition for development. What we now have to do is ensure that the benefits of this improved macroeconomic situation don't stop at the big private sector players, but it also is accessible for the small and medium size, or the micro, small and medium size enterprises in business. It is accessible to the workers. We can't call the workers to the table front and center when the sacrifices are to be made, but when the benefits are to be shared, they're left out and they're forgotten.
But if I may interrupt you though, what you said just now,
we have to use things like taxation in a more progressive way. We've seen that the emphasis on consumption taxation has actually increased poverty in this country.
Different approach you take to taxation.
So we would have, for example, a more progressive taxation,
yes,
where we would have lower consumption taxes. A GCT, for example, the rate of GCT
that's where this
would be
government is
reduced.
going.
Well, that's not what they've done. It's not what you say, it's what you've done.
Yes.
The fact that the living standards have fallen for the average Jamaican, but fallen dramatically in the Kingston metropolitan area over the last year, between 2016 and 17. 17, of course, is the latest figures that we have. But there was a 30% increase in the poverty rate in the Kingston metropolitan
But what
area.
I'm probing for, is this. They say, the critics, that this campaign for PNP leadership is one that has so far been devoid of big ideas. I know you're an ideas man, so I'm putting to you. What you've said just now is what I'd expect from any government minister to say, well, this is what we hope to do and so forth. I'm asking Peter Bunting to tell the viewers, tell the audience, the big economic change that you would preside over, because Jamaica needs to go in this direction at this time. What is that, or is there no such thing?
Well, you have to look at it sector by sector.
Yeah.
But let me just use two examples. I attended a workshop for small and medium-sized enterprises. It was co-hosted by the PSOJ and the Bankers Association. And a young female entrepreneur got up and said, look, it's not just financing that's an issue. In fact, she had a successful career in the private sector before she started her own business. So funding wasn't her issue. But she said she designed and sold clothes. But somebody could go on Amazon, a Jamaican with a Jamaican bank-issued credit card could go on Amazon, buy a selection of clothes, accessories, shoes, and have it shipped to Jamaica easily. But at her store, the banks didn't provide an e-commerce platform that they could do the same thing. So that person had to jump in their car, fight through all the roadwork chaos that is going on to reach to her store to do the same purchase. Now, that is the platform that we need to fix. We need to ensure that our local entrepreneurs have the same e-commerce platform available to them by our banks that they provide for Amazon and other international.
Let me take a question from the floor. Tishan?
Good night. A special good night to the comrade leader in waiting, Peter Bunting.
Thank you.
On a few occasions, I've heard you've described yourself as a market socialist. How does a market socialist operate in a modern political structure? And who is a modern and who is a market socialist?
Okay, so I first used that term in the early 90s when the PNP, and in fact, one of the reasons the then Prime Minister and Comrade Leader Michael Manley recruited me into government at the time, into the public sector, was because he said, you're a freshly minted MBA, and I am surrounded by a lot of dyed-in-the-wool socialists, and we have to transition to a more liberal economy. And why I use that term to describe myself as a market socialist was to attempt to say to people that we have to use the efficient market to run our economy. But we can't forget the social justice objectives of democratic socialism of the 70s. So what you're really doing is fusing the efficiencies of markets to run economies without forgetting the objectives of equality of opportunity, equity, ensuring that nobody, no child in particular, gets left behind and doesn't have a clear pathway to success through education, through other social services.
All right, there's another question over here. We'll take this.
Hi, good night, everybody. Good night, Mr. Bunting. I saw a video of you recommending exercising 3 times a day and reading. Now, I am a reader myself, so my question to you is, what would be on your list of must-reads?
Wow. A couple things, and these are classics. These are not, recent books. But there's a book called A Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck, and A Different Drum by Scott Peck that I would recommend to anybody to read. There is, and essentially what it talks about is discipline, self-discipline, love, community, things like that. There's a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Again, an old book, but a classic, and I would recommend it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And there's one more for the entrepreneurially minded people called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I also recommend that.
Let me get back. Thank you for that. Let me get back to, before we move, let me get back to the economy again, because the economy is central to everything. So I hear you on the e-commerce platform that is necessary. But
and I was also giving you a second example, which was agriculture.
Yeah.
As we've toured this country over the last few weeks, you see South Clarendon looks like a wasteland. The closure of the Monimus factory there has just devastated the South Clarendon economy. We were in Duckinfield. A couple of weeks later, it was the last day of processing cane at the factory. It was closing. Remember, Surge Island had closed before that. We were in Frome last week, I think it was, and the cane farmers there were very anxious because they saw the sugar industry in that part of the island just going down.
Yes.
Now, this has created a huge amount of economic anxiety, displacement, loss of earnings. One of the things that we have been experimenting with in my own constituency, we've looked at shade house clusters where 20 farmers get together, each with their own shade house, each growing their own tomatoes, sweet peppers, as the case may be, but they share facilities. They have a common packing house. They purchase inputs together so they get better prices and better transportation costs. We have 2 of those working now for a couple of years, and they've been very successful. In fact, one group has been able to buy their own refrigerated truck so that they now cut out the middleman and they can send their product directly to the supermarkets and the hotels. And these are the sort of new models, really what was a hybrid between an individual farmer and a cooperative. And we're finding new ways to be much more productive and give much better income.
I'm going to come back to the economy though. George has a question from the floor.
Good night, ladies and gentlemen. And a special good night to the bravest comrade at this time. My question, Comrade Bunting, come September 7th, you would have been elected as the president of the People's National Party. You would have done so without saying much about what you would do as Prime Minister. So the question to you is, what are some of the guiding principles for what a Jamaica would look like with Peter Bunting as Prime Minister of Jamaica?
Thank you, and I'm glad you kept it at principles, because we don't want to publish our manifesto at this time. The time will come for that. But there are a few core principles that I think needs to guide any political movement and needs to therefore underpin any political administration. Integrity, accountability, participative democracy, where it's not just some at a level of a cabinet or a parliament that's that's making the decisions and passing them down to everybody. We need to engage in these sort of town hall settings. The wider public, every time we're coming with a new policy that's going to affect their lives. And we get that feedback and we get that engagement. If Michael Manley used to use a term, self-reliance. We can't have sacrificed so much to get our economy back on track, to then become subject to the manipulations of large powers, whether of the East or the West. So we have to go back to being self-reliant and being really politically and economically independent.
Yeah.
Those are some broad principles that we use to guide us.
Let me take another question from the floor. On your side, Jeremy?
Yes. Mr. Bunting? Okay, you have said some big words today. Social inclusion, economic partnerships, etc. But you've also spoken about the banking and finance industry, which you came from. The chairman of your party has been championing reduction in banking fees, and there has been a certain silence from other members of your party concerning that as it affects people, general people. As someone going for the presidency of your party, and as someone who's coming from the banking industry, are you prepared to argue that banking fees should be reduced and how banks are supposed to expand financial inclusion beyond rich and middle class people to poor people in this country?
Absolutely. How I feel banking fees should be reduced is through increased competition. We've been very reluctant to facilitate new entrants into our financial space, I think coming out of the experience of FinSAC in the 1990s. But truthfully now, that is a couple decades behind us. We have much more efficient banking models that we can now introduce in Jamaica. There are, fintech companies that offer payment services that don't require brick and mortar branches, and therefore their overheads are very low and their fees can be very low. There are successful models of that all across the world now that we can introduce. We have a new central bank governor. He is a private sector person. So I'm looking forward to a much more open and receptive central bank in terms of licensing new players in the financial sector with much more efficient models for payment systems and therefore much lower fees.
Final question from the floor for this segment, sir. You're having trouble with your mic. Can we get that on quickly, please? There we go.
Night. Good night, my comrade leader in waiting. This question is from my aunt. She's 60 years old, and she's a delegate of the People's National Party. And she said, Jason, I want you to ask our leader this question. It's important to her. She said, at your launch in Mandeville, you made mention of an endowment fund. Not much has been explained, and she would like to know how it would work and some more details of that fund.
Okay. And for those of you who are at the launch, you forgive me if you're hearing something over again. But essentially, what an endowment fund is really an account, an investment fund that you raise money, put in, and then that fund now invests in stocks, in bonds, in things that will yield a good return, an annual income. That income you will now use for social purposes. One of the things we've recognized, and George, every community that I go into, certainly not just in the past few months, but in a by-election, whenever, the comrades say, come make us introduce you to the foundation comrade in the community. And they often carry you up a little hill and you visit somebody and when you see the conditions that they're living under as the foundation comrade, you're embarrassed. And this is something that, you know, all of us on the team have been encountering. And in discussing how we could address it, Mark Golding volunteered that he would, using his skills as a lawyer, as well as an investment banker, anchor this initiative to establish an endowment fund. Hopefully we'll get charitable status for it. And then we go out on a fundraising drive, get funds to invest, and we can establish an annual income for this endowment fund that can be used to help those comrades who have fallen on hard times.
So just before you clap, the seed in the fund, where is it coming from? You're seeking that from investors, or are you starting it with something in it?
That will be started by fundraising. And perhaps what we'll use is each year a percentage of the funds raised by the party will go into that endowment fund.
By the party treasury?
All the funds that's raised by the party,
Yes.
whether, you know, during from dues from members,
Yes.
from fundraising,
Okay,
from the
percentage goes
corporates,
there.
etc., percentage will go to that fund.
Crime and corruption. You said earlier about, in response to the question from the floor about Bunting as PM, what he would do. Let me put this question to you from Alex Leo Shaw on social media. It's actually from Instagram, Alex Leo Shaw. He says, on the issue of corruption and persons who have been given unfavorable reports from the Auditor General's department over time, would you be brave enough to include Philip Paulwell in a future Bunting cabinet, says Alex Leo Shaw from Instagram.
One of the things Omar Davis used to always counsel us younger politicians. He said, when you're running at champs, focus on winning champs. And after you win champs, then you worry about the Olympics. So I'm not going to be drawn into naming a cabinet at this point in time. But I think I would prefer to stay away from the personal and just speak to the principle.
Yes.
Because I think I have established a track record of challenging appointments that have been made, licenses that have been issued, contracts that the government has entered into, where I don't think the counterparty met the fit and proper criteria.
Inside the PNP?
Inside the parliament. Inside the parliament.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it won't
so
take
inside the
much
PNP
research.
too?
Well, obviously, in cabinet, you give your advice, but we're bound by an oath not to disclose that advice. But I think you can assume that I am consistent in.
But let me ask you this way. Let me ask you this way. Is it then that if you win on September 7th, you get a crack at being Prime Minister?
Home crowd.
Kill me later. Yes, you get a crack at being Prime Minister. Is it that Peter Bunting will have a diktat to say anybody who has in the past been given a bad rap by any integrity commission, any Auditor General's department, if your name has been aligned with anything that the public perceives to be a scandal or is a scandal in the classic sense of the word, you can forget about cabinet. Peter Bunting is not taking you forward. Would you lay down that as the law if you're Prime Minister?
Well, clearly for me, any important position of trust, there must be a fit and proper criteria applied. It must be. As to anybody who has been involved in a scandal, no, that, you know, is a sort of, it's not a very objective term.
But it is objective because a scandal is clear.
No. Hold on. Let me use an example.
Yes.
One of the most unfair things that I have ever seen happen and observed in politics was what the JLP did to Fenton Ferguson when he was Minister of Health.
Peter.
And you may have allowed people to call that a scandal, but what time has shown is that he was actually performing better than the successor has been performing.
Hold on.
So that is why I'm saying you can't just use a subjective thing like somebody call it a scandal. That does make it a scandal. But what I can guarantee you is that there will be a genuine fit and proper standard that will apply to anybody.
Let me say two things. And the gloves have come off now. Let me say two things. One, a scandal by definition. A scandal is not something that you prove on the back end. A scandal is something that captivates the attention of the public because it is something the public has an interest in. That's what makes it a scandal. It is something, it's about public interest. Hold on. Look now, if you check the dictionary, that's what the scandal is defined as. That's all I'm saying. Secondly, I said to you clearly, if the Auditor General, I said clearly, if the Auditor General's department or other commission that deals with integrity and or corruption or maladministration or malfeasance has had cause to give someone a bad rap, if that person can assume that, boy, my name was dragged in this, Peter is not going to look my way for the cabinet. That's exactly what I asked.
Well, certainly, if it is an objective authority, like the Auditor General, or the Integrity Commission, then that's fine. Absolutely. I mean, we can be very clear. If they are indicted by one of those agencies, then that person cannot hold a position of trust.
Excellent, because you see,
I'm just saying, it can't be just what people are calling,
but
because
Peter,
that can be orchestrated by political PR.
And that is true, and that's why I restated.
And there's due process.
And that's why I restated the question.
Entitled.
That's why I restated the question.
Thank you. Okay, well, we're at what? We're at what?
There you go. Right. So we, I come back to this now, though. I'm very happy that you've said that. So Jamaica can have the reasonable expectation that those persons who will be around if you win. Hold on. Not if he wins the presidency. I'm going beyond that. If he becomes prime minister. If you become prime minister, those persons who may be around at that time, who have had brushes with those commissions of parliament or those important bodies, they can expect not to get a call from you for cabinet appointment. I want to get that clear.
As I said, I'm not going to sit here starting to appoint my cabinet, but that will be a very important criterion that I will use in determining this election.
Very well. I've heard you talk about crime and the management of crime and the public health approach. And persons are saying, what's that? What's Bunting talking about? What is that?
Well, we pioneered that approach in 2013-14, when after 2 years as minister, I recognized that you couldn't solve the violent crime problem by just throwing more police and military resources at it. What you needed to do was address the root causes. You can't just be tough on crime without being tough on the causes of crime. And a big part of it, a big part of that is when you increase the capital budget of the ministry from 2 billion to 20 billion, which it is now.
Yeah.
But none of that is being invested back in the communities that are generating these criminals. It's not improving the housing stock. It's not improving garbage collection. It's not improving infrastructure. It's not taking the sewage that's running in the streets of some of these communities that the little children have to be skipping over when they're playing. If you don't address those issues, if you don't do that social investment, you will always be fighting the flames of violent crime.
Just before I go to Mario on the floor, I know where the public health approach to crime fighting is concerned, I know from my own information, it worked in the 60s in Yugoslavia and in Hungary. Where has it worked in recent time that you could adapt the approach even beyond what you did when you were minister?
Well, one of the things we invested in was training violence interrupters. There's an organization in the States called Cure Violence. Dr. Gary Slotkin was the founder of it.
That's Chicago.
Yes,
Yeah.
and we brought him here, and he worked with the PMI to share best practice because they were also doing some good work. We pumped additional resources. They trained violence interrupters in St. Catherine North. And you will notice this year, without a state of emergency, murder and shooting are down in St. Catherine North, largely as a result of the long-term work of these violence interrupters, even though much less resources are being spent compared with St. James and Western Jamaica. So it has been proven in Jamaica, it has been proven all across the world, but we seem to keep having to relearn lessons each time an administration changes. And I was particularly disappointed that the Unite for Change initiative, which was not only taking that approach, but trying to create a partnership and get everyone to buy into that with the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Youth, the Ministry of Justice, with their restorative justice initiatives. And we were getting some traction going. And the one thing that I asked my successor to continue was that Unite for Change initiative. And it was almost as if that was the kiss of death, because immediately they forgot about it.
Mario has a question from the floor.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mario Galbert, and I'm a student at the University of the West Indies studying political science. Over the years, the People's National Party has been crippled with corruption allegations. Mr. Bunting, what do you intend to do to return the credibility of the People's National Party? That's a simple question.
Thank you.
Well, I think you establish trust and credibility through behavior. Not what you say, but what you do, and by doing it consistently. By setting processes in place that apply to everyone. And I think that's what we did in the 2007 to 2011 period when I was General Secretary, and we were struggling with some of the same issues coming out of the post-Trafigura era. We established our internal integrity commission to vet candidates. We started, myself and Mark Golding as treasurer, we started auditing our financial statements, the first time for a political party in the Caribbean, and we published them, and we presented them at our annual conferences every year. And this is the type of behavior that I think builds trust, builds credibility, when you demonstrate a commitment to accountability, and that's where we will be going.
Just before I go to the other side of the room, though, another strand of the credibility issue is this. Jamaicans increasingly say, look, it's hard to accept a party bawling about corruption when it is that when acts occurred on their watch as government, those bawling the loudest now were silent then. I think that has a large part, a significant part to do with the credibility issue. How do you fix that?
I've only been, recently anyway, I did a short stint as a junior minister in the early 90s, but in cabinet was the 2012 to February 2016 period. And I'm not going to say that there was no incidents of misfeasance or malfeasance, but certainly compared to what we have seen in the last 3 years, I think we were a model administration. And we worked hard, many of us in the cabinet, and what you do in cabinet, again, is secret, but we worked hard to ensure that anything that came in front of us that had, that couldn't stand scrutiny, that did not go forward.
But you know why that's difficult for a man like me to accept? Journalist for that time, running down MPs with microphones, asking for comments on their colleagues embroiled in controversial things, and I get the no comment. And many of those who gave me the no comment then can stand, well, not you, can stand behind the statement that you just gave to say, well, nothing happened in that time. So I'm just saying that it is a credibility problem because MPs kept silent when their colleagues are in the frying pan and they're crying blue murder when the other side is embroiled in issues. And I'm asking if this is not a fundamental issue that needs to be fixed.
Yeah, there is a sense of collegiality when people tend not to attack their colleagues who might be under pressure by the media, etc. They don't jump in, but the sort of egregious corruption, nepotism, cronyism that we're seeing over the last 2 or 3 years, we certainly had none of that during the time I was in
Let me go back
cabinet.
to the floor. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, pleasant night, everyone. Pleasant night to you, Comrade Bunting. I just have a question. You're on the record of voting against the state of emergencies, and I am a student at the University of the West Indies studying law. And the majority of us would applaud you for taking such a stance. However, the position is contrary to your party, and they have continued to vote for the state of emergencies. So my question is, for you, what is the point of voting no? What is your issue with the government's crime-fighting plan?
Thank you.
Well, first of all, my vote no was a matter of conscience for me, and I made that clear. That notwithstanding whatever politically expedient thing there is to do, there are some lines that for me you don't cross. The state of emergency was one of those. First issue was that, in my view, supported by opinion of eminent Queen's Counsel, is that the way it's being used now is unconstitutional. The Constitution is our highest law, and if we start playing around with whether we observe or not observe that law, then we're on a slippery slope to descend into some kind of either authoritarian type of government or anarchy. So I believe that that's the first thing. The way it's being used, the serial and sort of routine use is unconstitutional.
But have you said that to your party, though?
I have said that to my party, and if you recall, in December last year, my party generally took that position and did not allow it to go forward.
But what has changed?
Truthfully, I think they've been outmaneuvered in the public relations battle. The GLP has persuaded people, persuaded even many journalists, that the only way you can get police and soldiers to blanket a community is under state of emergency. And that is not true.
But Peter,
that is not
but
true.
Peter, I can't make you move on from here, because let me go again. You say that eminent Queen's Counsel have advised you.
The party have advised the party.
Then the party has gone against legal advice by voting yes. Is that what you're saying?
That is what I'm saying. As I interpret it, let me just say that. As I interpret the advice that we received, when we all voted against it in December,
yes.
That advice for me still stands in the current situation.
But let me clarify. Was the party given new advice after December?
No.
Okay, so it's
not that I'm aware of. I'm not.
So from your understanding, it's the same old advice that they decided to vote differently on. That's a problem. That's a problem. I'm asking you if that's a problem.
Well, all I would say is, under my leadership, I would try and persuade my colleagues to come to my point of view.
Let me go back to the floor for another question. Aliyah?
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Comrade Bunting. There are many Jamaicans like myself who are not connected in high places, who are just ordinary people who have ordinary issues, who have to work hard, whether as a farmer, a teacher, or a household helper to survive. So we don't have persons out there who are looking out necessarily for us. So we are depending on our parliamentarian, and we're depending on our prime minister, especially, to set a framework to protect the people of Jamaica. In your past few weeks and months, Comrade Bunting, of going around the island and meeting many of those ordinary Jamaicans, these are not the ones talked about in the newspaper. By meeting those persons, how has it impacted you on a personal level? And what is your tolerance for corruption like now that you have spoken with them?
What has struck me, maybe the truth of the matter is that my constituency of Central Manchester is probably better off socioeconomically than the average constituency in Jamaica.
Yes.
And so moving around the entire island, going into the towns, walking the markets, engaging people, I have really, it has come home to me, the difference, the gap between what the macroeconomic statistics are saying and what the average person on the ground is experiencing in their life.
Yeah.
And that is something that we will have to respond to as a party and as a government.
Let me, can I squeeze? I want to get this gentleman quickly. Your question, I have 60
Good
seconds.
night, Comrade Bunting. I'm Councillor Renier Benjamin from the Westchester Division. After the recent court ruling on the unconstitutionality of the NIDS bill, you posited that a point made by the Chief Justice as well, that why not give everybody a free passport? Now, what would a national identification look like under your stint as Prime Minister?
Thank
and
you.
what
Thank you.
biometrics would you allow?
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm particularly familiar with the passport system as a former Minister of National Security with portfolio responsibility. And it immediately struck me when the Chief Justice said that, is that we already have so many pieces of identification. That why do we need to create a new one? Yes. Why don't we just make one that we currently have universal? No, we're talking about criminalizing people who don't want to accept NIDS. I have yet to meet one person who don't want a free passport.
Yes.
I have yet to meet one person.
All right.
So it seems logical to me. Use the passport. We're moving to biometric passports anyway.
Yes.
And have that as a universal ID.
Yes or no question. If you lose on September 7, will you still play a prominent role in the party? Will you stay?
In the unlikely event, I've always served the party in whatever role. Even when I've not been in representational politics, I've served on boards, I've served in fundraising, I've always supported the party. And I will continue. I promise the constituents of Central Manchester a minimum of 4 terms. And I've gone 3, so I have at least 1 more for them.